Well, you know what they say about vampires. You better watch out for stakes. Well, stakes to a vampire is like sunlight to a moth. Both can be a source of extreme pain and, in most cases, unfortunate destruction. Well, today I welcome you to join us as we sink our teeth into this darkly comedic yet plagued world of Roman Polanski's Dance of the Vampires. Dance of the Vampires is a musical remake of the 1967 Roman Polanski film The Fearless Vampire Killers. The music was composed by the late Jim Steinman and orchestrated by Steve Margoshes. Dance of the Vampires would premiere under the name of Tanz der Vampire at Austria's Raimund Theater in October of 1997, starring actor, dancer, and choreographer Mr. Steve Barton. Now, Steve would go on to win the 1998 Image Award for his portrayal of Count von Krolock. From the initial premiere of Tanz der Vampire, English producers were seeking to bring the show to English-speaking countries. So, by 1998, under the influence of Steinman and his manager David Sonnenberg, it was decided to bring the musical, which was now titled Dance of the Vampires, to Broadway. In October of 2000, a tentative fall 2001 opening was announced, along with the declaration that Steinman himself would serve as the show's director, despite never having directed for the stage. As early 2001 approached, however, and a reading for potential producers and investors was announced in the news section of Steinman's fan website, things began taking on a more concrete shape. Comedic playwright David Ives was brought on to help reconfigure the book with a view toward a more comic angle instead of a straightforward adaptation of the successful Austrian version, which would later prove to be one of the many flaws that plagued the production. This new version, described to the press as a big Wagnerian musical with lots of humor, a lot of it being pure Mel Brooks humor, and a lot of it Anne Rice, was met with a mixed reception. First off, potential investors and producers seemed to love the score. However, they felt that the new book, with its mix of body humor and eroticism, needed fine tuning. Now, unfortunately, Steinman's creative disagreements with his producing team and their seemingly inability to raise the investment money in time for a now rather unrealistic fall opening led to tense situations backstage. At this point, the show needed some kind of drawing cord to attract investors, and it was decided that a star lead in the role of Count von Krolock would be just the trick. Oh my. Ultimately, the team came to an agreement with Tony-winning actor Michael Crawford, best known on Broadway at the time as the Phantom of the Opera. However, in order to cast a Broadway star such as Crawford didn't come without its challenges. Michael wanted some assurances before he would take on a planned 3 years in the role. First, he demanded complete creative control of his character. He wanted a retirement package of up to $180,000 a week, and he also preferred to have first refusal on the option to reprise his role if the show went to London or Los Angeles. Well, additionally, though not a major point in negotiations, Crawford also sought assurance that he would receive the role of von Krolock in any resulting film version, having recently lost the film role to the Phantom to Mr. Gerard Butler. Well, of the 4 points of negotiation, Crawford won two: creative control and first refusal, skimming back the original salary for a much slimmer $30,000 a week. Now, by the time an official deal with Crawford was announced, he had already been pulling his weight in the creative control department. Michael was involved in reshaping the role of von Krolock in a more comic fashion, insisting that the role as written was too close to that of his original role of the Phantom. Now, his major contributions were in the accent of the Count, which was actually a mix of Italian and Cockney tones that he claimed made singing the score a whole lot easier, and costume designs, which helped to hide alleged weight problems. Now, the opening on Broadway was set for April of 2002, while further casting sessions for secondary leads and the ensemble were set for September of 2001. Well, unfortunately, as a result of the September 11th attacks, the game plan changed significantly. With most of the show's major creative team based in London, a myriad of logistic delays were caused by mass cancellation of flights, among other variables. Realizing that there was actually no way to open before the Tony cut off as planned, and the inability to raise his share of the investment on time, Sonnenberg publicly announced the postponement of the show's opening to October. Well, the cast eventually rapidly shaped around Michael Crawford, including actress and singer Mandy Gonzalez, future Tony nominee Max von Essen, and Star Trek's Renee Auberjonois. On paper, Dance the Vampires looked like magic. A celebrated rock composer, a critic's darling who had authored several off Broadway plays, a Tony Award winning director, and a high wattage Broadway star were the captains of this ship. However, rehearsals proved just how unsteady this ship actually was. John Rando had never directed a musical of this size and quickly proved overwhelmed, according to cast members. Choreographer Carafa wasn't helping at all. His ideal of staging a big dance number was to tell the performers, hey, just rock on. And to make matters far worse, company morale was no better, as cast members began poking fun at Crawford's weight-sensitive costumes behind his back, calling him a fat rooster. Well, adding to the lack of a definitive creative head was the director's unplanned absence, due to his mother's death, which sidelined Rando from the production during several weeks of previews. Steinman proved to have a bad attitude about the process also, later claiming that he saw what was wrong with the show, stating, we ended up with two shows at war with each other. One was sensual and gothic, the other was camp, rocky horror. Now, I knew the critics would kill us for that, and we were the perfect target. A fat lady with a sign on her back that said, kick me. However, unable to express his opinions about fighting with Crawford or the rest of the team, which resulted in Steinman being viewed as verbally abusive by certain cast members, he opted instead to stop coming to the theater regularly, which was the result of actually being fired from his own manager. As a result, citing Sonnenberg's inability to come up with his share of the investment, Steinman managed to get Sonnenberg thrown overboard as a producer. And at about the same time, several cast members also left the show before opening night. Well, it seemed Dance of the Vampires was over before it began. By October of 2002, it seemed a dimly moonlit light peeked out of a long, dark tunnel when the show finally started previews after technological and creative delays, opening at the Minskoff Theater. Now, initially, the seemingly final result was an altered version with campy humor that differed considerably from the original show. An attempt was made at arriving at a comfortable middle between the two shows at war with each other during previews, with 30% of the dialogue cut to allow room to expand the score and arrive closer to the original almost sung-through concept. The vampire costumes were redesigned to look less freakish, and a brand new restaging of the shock ending set in modern times was also drawn in. Unfortunately, with those major changes aside, Crawford began regularly changing his dialogue and inserting his own jokes, testing the strength of the material to the point that his co-star Renee became paranoid about all of his jokes being cut, and the two began trying to step on each other's punchlines. Another unfortunate side effect of the change in material was that Steinman was out of the picture, which meant that there was no one around to write new lyrical material as necessary. Was this moonlit light spelling the end of a troubled musical? Not just yet. After a prolonged period of development and 61 previews later, Dance the Vampires would officially open its war-torn doors in December of 2002. Unfortunately, with critics lambasting the show, with the work of lead star Michael Crawford being reviewed very harshly. Now, Steinman chose not to attend opening night and publicly distanced himself from the show, stating, "That show that I wrote is not at the Minskoff. The show that is dear to me is still running over in Vienna. The one at the Minskoff was just utter shit." Now, with such terrible reviews, the show would permanently close its doors in January of 2003 after just 56 performances. According to the New York Times, it was one of the costliest failures in Broadway history, losing roughly $12 million, easily eclipsing the infamous musical disaster Carrie. Now, in a much lighter note, in and around February of 2007, Tons der Vampire returned to the Raimund Theater in Vienna in a scaled-down concert version to help celebrate the musical's 10th anniversary. In September of 2009, the musical would return to Vienna for a third time, opening at the Ronacher Theater, featuring new sets, costumes, and lighting. In a surprising twist, although Dance of the Vampires would seal its fate on Broadway, a new musical stage show titled Vampires Rock was developed in 2004 based on the original concept of Dance of the Vampires. The musical is set in the year 2030, where New York City is populated by the undead. Baron von Rockula, owner of the Live and Let Die Club, is in search of a bride and must eventually convince her to agree to eternal immortality. Well, the show features a number of notable rock anthems, including songs from Meatloaf, Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, Alice Cooper, Bon Jovi, Queen, Whitesnake, and Bonnie Tyler, among others. The show was completely headed by Steinman and has included 40-year career actress and singer Tova Wilcox and the UK's X Factor Season 10 winner, Sam Bailey. Well, folks, Dance the Vampires reminds us that laughter can actually be the best weapon against fear, and that even the most monstrous creatures can be touched by love, or in this case, an embarrassing death. Remember, in the face of disaster, even that forgotten candy bar in your backpack can be a real lifesaver. Just watch out for vampires, because they can be real suckers.